18. I know I have week 17 up here, but I just am going to start by telling you what we're going to work on today. I want to review a lot of what you did last week, so I'm going to hit a little bit on language, an extra topic on cognitive development, and then I have some practice AP questions that are kind of a mix from the College Board. So that's why I had week 17 up. And in week 18, we're going to switch to looking at social development. And that's going to include some work on what the psychologists refer to as attachment. So that's going to be how you kind of can get along, or not get along. Attach is the right word. So how is your relationship with your parents when you're very, very, very little, before you ever have any memory of it? And also of parenting styles, which that's something that is going to change and develop kind of as your relationship with your parent grows and they get older and you get older. There's a funny little quiz on parenting styles. You're also going to look at moral development. I really like this little baby lab that shows you how early babies know the difference between right and wrong. It's pretty amazing. And then just a little bit on gender development. I think the College Board does a little bit of overkill here, but I'm going to make sure you know the terms that you need to know that'll be on the AP exam. So that is week 18. And so like I said, we check the work. I put this up here because I try to use humor a lot too. You'll notice I always have it up, and I just thought if you spend any time working with little kids, or you're trying to get even teenagers to learn with you, humor creates a very playful learning environment, right? Where we can sometimes have things that don't feel like learning, especially for little kids. And so we can see that all toddlers, all little children, when we're trying to be funny, so here is, using a banana, but laughter encourages social interaction. We're going to talk about how social interaction is such a key to language development. And when we do things in a nonsensical way, it just is more fun. I remember my Uncle Bob, he always joked around with us, and you always wanted to go see him. So think about that if you have to work with little kids or anybody. How can it be a little bit funny? So like I said, we're gonna cover one part of cognition that wasn't too much in last week, called theory of mind experiments. This gives us a good chance again to practice our experimental methods. I want to talk about interactions with language learning, and then I have a bunch of College Board questions in the lesson today instead of having on the College Board site, so we can discuss some extra terms that I think come up to make sure you got them. So the first activity here is, what is theory of mind? All right, so you can pause the video and read the long definition, but I'm going to do it very shortly. Theory of mind is having the idea, understanding that somebody else has a brain different from yours that thinks differently than you do. And this seems so like, duh, right? That, yes, I know you think differently and I do, but there's a point at which this develops. And so what I want you to do is, you're going to pause this video, and your task, hopefully it takes you less than 10 minutes, but your task is to determine whether a child has developed theory of mind, right? So how could I find out if this group of children is able to understand that the adult or others in the room think differently than they do? And what we're really trying to establish is, at what age does a typical child have a theory of mind, right? And in your information, make sure you have a hypothesis, your subject, right? How did you get those subjects? Random sampling, right, to the assignment groups. What's your IV? What's your DV? What are your procedures? And how will you assess your results? All right, these are all things you have to be able to do with experiments. So let's take time to practice, and also see if you can write an experiment to find what age a child has a theory of mind. So when you're ready, just restart the video, and we're going to check your ideas, okay? So here we have how psychologists did this. They're going to make us watch it here, but that's okay.
Sister, where did you put that ball?
I don't know, you have to find it.
Okay.
Kindergarten is a really exciting time. One of the developmental hallmarks at this age is that children develop this awareness that other people have different thoughts and feelings than they do. This is called theory of mind. First,
Because he thought it was.
you thought it was. That's right. The first test we did was this representational change booklet, which shows different animals. What's this?
A bird.
A bird. What color is it?
Blue.
A blue bird. That's right. What do you see through this window?
A dinosaur.
And it is
Dinosaur.
a dinosaur. And then what do you see through this window here?
A lion.
A lion. Can you turn the page for me? And it is a
Lion. Sun.
sun. What did you think it was before I showed you?
A lion.
A lion. What do you think Millie will think it is before she sees it?
A lion.
What do you see there?
Lion.
And it's a,
Sun.
oh my gosh. What's inside?
Smarties.
Okay, can you open it up for me? There's a little bit of tape there. With each child, we showed them this box of Smarties and asked what was inside. When they went to open the box, instead of Smarties, they found raisins. What did you think? When I did the task with Pratmesh, he really had this understanding that his sister wouldn't know that he knew there were raisins inside the Smarties box. What do you think she'll think is inside? In the third and fourth tests, we set up a few different storylines, and at the end of these storylines, we asked the children a few different questions to find out whether they really understood the perspective and thinking of the two different dolls in the stories. They want to put the ball away, so they put the ball in the box. Can you open the box for me? Can you close it? Joey decides to go outside. And then May takes the ball and she puts it in the basket. And then Joey comes back inside. And where do you think he'll look for the ball?
In here.
In there. Why will he look in there?
Because that's where I put the ball.
And where is it really?
In the basket.
That's right. And then Ava decided to play a trick on her brother. The theory of mind tasks we carried out with these children help us measure their understanding of the invisible world of the mind. The fact that people have minds and that they act on the basis of what's in their minds, on what they think, and not necessarily on what is reality. But while she was doing that, she didn't see that Liam was actually watching, because he came back upstairs and he didn't say anything. He just saw his sister move the game from the cupboard to under the covers. But she didn't know that he was watching. So he came back in the room, and where will Ava think that Liam will look for the game? Why will she think that her brother will look in the cupboard?
Because
Because why?
he knows.
When you see these words trick, know, tell being used, it's an indication of a child's development of theory of mind. That's right. Because she tricked him, right?
So how close were some of your experiments to what they did, right? Trying to find out, did they think differently? And it's really interesting, without doing an experiment, to find out, does a child have theory of mind, will probably be when you first hear a child tell a lie, right? So most people, the first time they hear their child tell a lie, they're in absolute shock that the child is lying. This is bad. I have to correct this. I don't want this to happen. But really, if you step back for a second, if a child is lying, it means that they understand that you're thinking differently than they do, and they can try to get away with something or trick you. And it's actually a huge step in development. And so, although yes, I don't think it's good that my children lie, and I would try to correct the behavior, I also understood that it was a change in how they were thinking and understanding the world and others. And this is typical somewhere between 3 and 5 years old of when you're going to see this. The other very interesting experiments that were done, and you can kind of play around with this if you have little siblings or cousins that you want to see what happens, is just asking children, having a bowl of, say, maybe pretzels or candies and a bowl of broccoli. And even if you say to a little child, my favorite is broccoli, they will always try to offer you M&Ms or pretzels because that's their favorite. And then at some point, they'll recognize, around that age, 3 to 5, somewhere, that, well, you told them I like broccoli better. And so they can understand that your thinking is different from theirs. So theory of mind is a pretty interesting thing, and it leads to, the lack of theory of mind, which, if you look back to the slide, is often a problem in autism, is that They really don't understand that you are thinking differently than they are. So, kind of cool. All right, so the next part we wanted to do was on language development, all right? And I want you to look here. We have, so 0 years old, right? So this is first 3 years of life. So 0 years, here's 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, and kind of measured vocabulary and words. And then we have these 3 lines. We have higher SES, middle SES, and lower SES, right? And so you can see that for about the first 16 months, we get very similar language development in terms of number of words, right? Right around 12 months, you start to hear your first words. And then somewhere in that first and second year, you get this huge difference, right? And what I want you to think about is why do we have this difference, right? So the obvious, and the thing I think you hear a lot, and you might even have seen reading different things, is that it's the number of words you hear, right? So these kids born in higher socioeconomic statuses, they're hearing more words, and so they're learning more. But I want you to watch, I want you to think about interaction between the child and parent and why this might impact learning of vocabulary. So here I have a second short video for you, and I know this is going to load over here, right? So why interaction really matters in language learning here.
And long before they can speak, language learning starts when children have those back and forth conversations with their parents and caregivers in those very, very early days of life. From birth, babies start to have back and forth interactions with their parents by looking, making sounds, moving their bodies. And those early conversations are helping children learn the most important things they're going to need to know about how to be a conversation partner. They learn to pay attention to somebody. They learn to take a turn. They learn to respond when somebody else says something to them. And then they learn to take another turn. And there you have it. That's the beginning of conversations. As they get older, they learn to use gestures, and they learn to use sounds more consistently, and eventually they learn to use words. So we can see that so much is learned in those early years, all about having conversations, and that's really the foundation for learning to speak. A study conducted by MIT showed that children aged 4 to 6 who had experienced more turn-taking in back and forth interactions with their caregivers had more activity in the part of the brain called Broca's area, responsible for language production and comprehension. This study clearly showed that the more conversations a child had with his or her caregiver, the greater amount of activity occurred in the brain in that important area. So this showed us something really important, because it's not just how many words a child hears that's important, but it's how many turns back and forth a child has while hearing those words. And it's really important that the child is participating in those conversations and not just listening to somebody else speak. So that's why quality is more important than quantity. It is important for children to hear lots of words, but it's the quality of the interaction in which the child hears those words that really is the most important part of helping a child learning to communicate.
So I want to stop it there, because I think it may kind of get you to my point that if we were simply to look at this chart and make the conclusion that, one group is hearing many more words than another, which they are, right? We would kind of come up and say, oh, we just need to teach parents of different groups to speak more to their children. But that's not the point, right? Just speaking more doesn't solve this problem. And I can tell you, my mother was a nurse, and she worked different shifts at different time when I was a child. My father was an electrician, and there wasn't a lot of time for what you saw in that video of sitting down and playing with children. I don't really remember being played with, because everybody in my life was they were just focused on working, right? Where we see this group, right? Middle socioeconomic status families are busy working, and when the children are given to other caregivers, those caregivers don't necessarily have time to do back and forth interaction with the children. But the positive message here is it is something we can teach, right? You can stress with new parents how important it is to have this give and take. And then, as a child begins to speak and still maybe not making very much sense, you can really encourage, right, that turn taking and that paying attention to one another. So this is something that if we spread the message, you can be advocates for the language learning of young children. All right, so on to these practice questions. This video is getting kind of long, so I want to make sure we move. Some of the questions, I'm just going to put up the question like this one, right? You can pause the video, read the question, give it an answer, and then when you're ready, restart the video. All right, so this one is pretty straightforward, so you can just check your answers. Some of them I'll go over, some of them I'm just going to show you the answer. Another one, right, so we have, this one's a little bit harder, make sure we see it. So we have a visual cliff, we have number of babies, we have a fearful response, an indifferent response, and the prompt. All right, and then I think you can read all of this. So go ahead and pause the video, and then you can restart. All right, so, and this is, I think I talked about this last week even, that it's so very interesting that babies between 6 and 9 months of age, they can perceive depth, and that's about the same time that they learn to crawl, right? These two things happen pretty simultaneously. All right, next one. All right, so when you're ready, so pause and then you can start. All right, and this one is a sensitive period, and I hope you remember this from what you did this week, that we have these certain sensitivities. So this is infancy 0 to 8 years old, and the sensitivity is very early for seeing, hearing, and touch. If we don't have our eyes, our ears, or any sensory information, those things are gonna kind of slowly decline. Speech and language, right, is a little bit later, but still very, very early, and it's gonna decline. And then we don't see that sort of same sensitive period for reading, mathematics, and critical thinking, right? This goes down very slowly if it's not being used, right? So these are our sensitive periods. All right, this chart is a bit crazy, right? And I think I put this question up here because I think if I was taking the AP exam and I saw this, I might be like, oh my goodness, I can't deal with this. It's too much, but let's try to break it down. This is, organogenesis is development of the baby, of all the organs, all right? Period dividing zygote, so in the first 2 weeks, implantation of the embryo, right? This is week 1 and week 2. Then we have the embryonic period weeks. Even if you don't really know what those things mean, you can see that's week 3 through 8. The fetal period weeks 9 through 36, and a full-term baby is considered at 38. And we can see greatest sensitivity to teratogens. Remember, those are things that hurt development, and less sensitivity. So we have greatest sensitivity in these weeks and less sensitivity. This is for the central nervous system, the heart, the ears, the eyes, and so forth. And so if we look here, right, I'm going to let you answer it. You can pause the video to read your answer choices. All right, I'll put them. I gotta try to figure out how you can see both. There we go. Now you can pause the video, and then you should be able to answer the question. All right, so I guess maybe I'll make sure you know the question. What conclusion can be drawn from the data about sensitivity to teratogens during prenatal development? All right, there you go. All right, and I hope you said D, because this is, if we see least likely after 9 weeks, right? So least we got nothing, right? So even though it's most likely, there's less sensitivity, and then there's nothing after 9 weeks, so that's why that's the right answer. All right, next one we got on Piaget. Hopefully you're associating his name to cognitive development. And here's your questions. Pause the video when you're ready. Go on. Hopefully you said D. This is one of those questions where it has nothing to do whether you really know too much, right? Because it's his case study. We're more of a scientific methods question. Next one, we have psychologists working with a group of people in West Africa. What are they testing? And pause the video and then you can restart when you're ready. All right, this is a conservation test, right? One of us cannot have more than the other. And I thought you might like this. I just put this up here that when we're trying to measure conservation, I think the easiest one to do is the big cup, small cup. You can do this with a little child, right? I played around with this with my children to see, what it's not fair. And then you show them, hey, the glasses really have the same amount inside. And you can do this with just spreading something out. Are they the same or not? On balls of clay, like matter, right? Just changing the shape. And then with length, can they see that those two? And there's an age in which children really understand conservation. All right, where are we at here? All right, another term to make sure you got. So pause the video when you're ready to go on. Press play again. All right, you should have zone of proximal development. Hopefully you're putting this with Vygotsky, right? And this, I use this a lot when I teach, a lot. Like, especially my mathematics classes, I really like to see that, students know about half of what they're going to learn in a math class before they start, because that's when we're really in the area to be able to learn kind of in this online learning environment where you're pretty independent. All right, next question. This one's on language acquisition. So pause the video, read the question, and then when you're ready, hit play again. All right, so this one is, again, another research question. So we can't get in the way of language development, so this would not be approved. Next one, we got another reading. You can see there's lots of reading charts, so we always start. So what do we got here? Grammatical proficiency, right? This must be some sort of measure of doing it, so some task. We have so very young, and then ages 3 to 7, 8 to 10. All right, in various cultures, expect students to master more than one language at school. This is native language speakers, right? And this is starting language at different ages. So age of acquisition of the second language. So this would be me. I'm a native speaker of English, and then it would be if I was learning German, right? And I started German over here when I was 20, right? So we can see my grammar proficiency. What would they expect? That it's going to be pretty low, right? So go ahead and read your answer choices, pause the video, and then when you're ready, you can restart. All right, and as soon as they start going to school, right? Like if you're young, 3 to 7, you can achieve in your native level, but anything after that, it starts to go down, right? That's the sensitive period of grammar. And I had a professor who taught very clearly that in preschool, we should be teaching students to sing and do things in other languages, and we should never put a pencil in a student's hand because of this, because we should start teaching foreign languages and then later worry about the things because they can't learn the grammar of another language. And it's why my children, one of the reasons why we chose to live in Hungary was so that they could be bilingual. All right, so next one, same information here, different question, so pause. And when you're ready, you can restart. All right, so this is, again, I gave it to you, the critical period, right? So critical period in grammar. Next question. All right, another term-heavy question to see if you got these words down. If you don't know what these words mean, when you're done, write it down. All right, pause the video, see if you can answer the question. All right, this is a phoneme. All right, phonemes are the smallest units of sounds, right? But make sure you know the other terms Take a minute, look them up. All right, last one. I know this video has been long. All right. So in homes where parents do not use correct grammar, their children tend to make more grammatical errors. Which of the following concepts identify a type of error that it might make? All right, and a speaking error is overgeneralization, right? And this is like if we take the rule, right? Chomsky's universal grammar rule says that we have these rules of how we do it. So, we put ed to make something past tense. He baked the cookies, he jumped over the ball, and then I goed to the store would be an example of the generalization because I'm adding that ed, but it doesn't apply in that situation. It should have been I went to the store, but in those places where the rules don't work. And we see this a lot of times. This happens even when parents are speaking with less grammatical mistakes. It's just that the child uses the overgeneralization and then the parent fixes it. And if the parent isn't aware that it's not correct, then they're not correcting their children. All right, so we did a lot of terms. Make sure you got them. Make sure you understand how to write an experiment for theory of mind. What are you going to turn in? Turn in your notes that you took of the words you're learning. Turn in the experiment that you wrote out. And let me know that if you have any questions about the lesson today. Thank you for your attention.